Okay, welcome coaches and welcome back to the second installment of the New Year webinar series. I'm delighted to say that we've got Stevie Poocher on tonight, and Stevie, you're going to run through tactical innovations in Gaelic football tonight. Obviously, we've had the first round of National League games, some interesting things happening there at the weekend, Stevie.
Yeah, Joe. Yeah, for sure. Just going to base tonight's webinar, Joe, more so around sort of probably the stats which came out of last year's championship. It's obviously very early in the season to see any sort of tactical innovations in this season, Joe. But heading to a few games this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, get a look at a few different teams from a few different divisions, and I'm sure we'll have more to say later in the summer on how the game's progressing.
Brilliant. And coaches, just remember to make sure that you're muted and that your video is off. And Stevie will have some questions you can ask Stevie at the end of the presentation. Okay, Stevie, it's all yours.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks very much. And thank you, coaches. Joe, just before we start, there is a large number of people still coming in. Can you admit them people, or do I have to do it?
Yeah, I'm admitting it.
Brilliant. Good stuff. I don't want anybody waiting. Brilliant. Listen, coaches, thanks very much. Welcome to Tactical Innovations in Gaelic Football. It's a short webinar that I've put together based on a few statistical pieces of information from last year. A few visuals for you as well, a bit of interaction as well, which I always love to do during these webinars. So feel free at any time to post anything in the chat. Joe can sort of keep in top of the chat there and can keep us informed on any questions that are coming in. So we'll get started anyway. So I suppose the first thing is what do you understand by the term tactical innovations? I like to start these webinars by throwing this out here and seeing if we can interact in any way whatsoever. So is there anything that you particularly understand by the term tactical innovations, or what do you see as tactical innovations in the game? Anything at all, feel free to fire into the chat there and we can have a look at a few things. Just flicking up the chat there. Anybody brave enough to fire in any pieces of wisdom? Would be greatly appreciated. Channeling is at the breakdown of the pitch. No, it's just an overview there. That little picture there was just something that we came up with in their blog we did a while ago. Channeling, we'll talk about channeling actually later in the webinar. It would be channeling would be using a certain area of the pitch to channel players into. Dublin were extremely effective at it a number of years ago of obviously using the sideline to their advantage as an extra defender. New ideas to outsmart your opponents. Absolutely. Pressing players up in the zones and opposition kickouts. Brilliant, Anthony. Yeah. James, something that hasn't been seen or something taken from another sport. Absolutely. Yeah. That's something we're going to look at now in a second. So, right. Well, anyway, we'll go beyond the norm, or maybe having better execution of what we already know. Absolutely. Okay. Excellent. So maybe taking players out of the comfort zone without taking it in their depth. But we'll move on. We'll move on and we'll look at this. So first of all, tactics. Tactics refers to the way in which a manager wants his team to set up and play the particular game. It can vary depending on the opposition or the players at your disposal, or even the weather. And I suppose, people have probably been very critical in the past of the coach there in question and the manager there in question, Rory Gallagher. But Rory has certainly shown in the last couple of years that, even offensively, his game plan has evolved. You know, particularly in the last couple of years with Derry as well. I suppose in Donegal, it was a hugely defensive game plan. I suppose Derry now are starting to display elements of really, really positive offensive play. And that can depend on a number of factors, including the players in your disposal. Just moving on to the next slide. So innovation. That can refer to something new or to a change made to an existing product, idea, or field. And I suppose somebody said that in one of the chats. I think someone said about new ideas to outsmart your opponent. So it's the same game, but there's just changes, little subtle changes made to it, to the existing product. So what is the existing product? The existing product is Gaelic football. On the left-hand side, it's a picture from the early 60s. You know, and the picture on the right-hand side is a picture from the last couple of years. You know, nothing has really changed in those two pictures, maybe the conditioning level and the style of the jerseys and such, but there's still an opponent trying to outfield another opponent. There's an opponent making a high catch, you know, 2 feet off the ground. There's opponents waiting for a ball to be offloaded. So it is the same game. It's the same principles. You're trying to outscore the opposition. You're trying to obviously invade the opposition's territory. It's an invasion game. Gaelic football, like soccer, like rugby, like hockey, they're all invasion games, and they all have different principles, tactics, skills, strategy. And innovation is just trying to do something new or change something to that existing product. And that's what tactical innovation is. So tactical innovation tonight, what we're going to look at is things that teams are maybe starting to do differently. And again, the whole gist of tonight, coaches, is that it's opinion based. It's all opinion based. There's no right or wrong answers. There's nobody saying that this is the way to do things. This is not the way to do things. I'm only giving my outlook on what I see as the tactical innovations coming into our games or that are already there. So Gaelic football is certainly evolving, coaches. I would say over the last, I have to be honest now, maybe over the last 7-8 years, since I've been involved at senior to county level, it has definitely evolved. You know, the S&C has become a huge part of modern day GA. Nutritionist. You have your GPSs, which are analysed to the extent that, you know, players' workloads are now being analysed. I know, speaking to a Gaelic development manager recently in another county, he was talking about the volume of McCrory Cup school players that the county had. And one of the things they used their GPS for was to actually monitor the workload of the school players. And obviously when it came then to training with the county minors, et cetera, you know, they'll be able to analyse all the data and have a look at all the data. And that's obviously taken, you know, sports science to a different level, particularly at the underage level. But it shows as well that the sport is obviously evolving and in my opinion, evolving for the better. Video analysis has now become a huge part of it. Always probably in the last number of years, it's been a big part of county football. But there's very, very few club teams that aren't doing it now. You know, the majority of club teams are using video analysis, and there's even young teams now using video analysis as well, which I think can only enhance the young person's experience and development in the game. You have your performance coaches. Some have been debated long and hard, their value, their worth, what do they do? But obviously all these teams that have been successful, including the team in the right-hand side, which is the Dublin backroom team. That's not an indictment of Dublin. That team is 100% exactly the same as any other inter-county coaching team that's been successful in the last number of years, whether it be Limerick hurlers, whether it be Kerry senior footballers. You know, it comprises of a vast large amount of backroom staff, 23 in that one, in Jim Galvin's, including your performance coaches, your life coaches, your psychologists. We now have a number of goalkeeping coaches. We have well documented over in Mayo. You have your transition coaches, your defensive coaches, your offensive coaches. Everyone having their roles and their clarity of roles in training. You know, and then they've got the medical support and the liaison officer. I remember speaking to an inter-county manager actually about this, and I remember asking him, you know, about the way the game is evolving. And one of the things he said to me was that you're nearly managing your backroom team as much as you're managing your playing squad. It's become that big, and it's an interesting one. Do we need all these people? well, that's a debate for another night. But I'm just trying to paint a picture of how the game is evolving here and what direction the game is going. So where do most of the scores, coaches, come from in Gaelic football right now? So is there any particular area of the field you feel they come from? Is there any particular part of the game they come from? Is it a kick out? Whatever, just give me an idea. Can people just sort of fire into the chat there where they feel the majority of scores are coming from in Gaelic football, based probably over the last number of years, and particularly last year's statistics in general? Where do you see the majority of scores coming from? I'll give you a minute or two there if you want to ping a few things into the chat. Again, there's no wrong answers. Feel free to fire anything in at all, coaches. That's what tonight's for as well. As much as learning, we're all interacting with each other as well. It's an important part of coaching. Turnovers around the D, turnovers. Couple of coaches coming in there with turnovers. Alex coming in around the D, absolutely around the D. There's a huge percentage of scores, large percentage of the scores will come from that scoring zone. Absolutely. Initial shots from retention of short kickouts won by your own team. Yeah. Okay, I think 80% of short kickouts that are retained end up in a scoring opportunity. Not necessarily maybe a score, but definitely a scoring opportunity. Long balls into space. Okay, so we all have our opinions on where we see the large majority of scores coming from in Gaelic football right now. What we actually have is over 60% of the scores in Gaelic football statistically now come from turnovers, which is extremely interesting. So that will include a turnover ball from either a misplaced pass or an intercepted pass, or a successful tackle. If an opponent makes a successful tackle, it may come from actually turning over an opposition kickout, being with an aggressive press, or turning over the opposition kickout. Maybe the opposition has gone short and you've turned the kickout over after a pass or two. It also includes missed shots by the opposition dropping short or blocked down. So it's very, very interesting when you consider that 60% of our scores in Gaelic football now come from turnovers. So it may be something that we can look at in the way we coach our team. It may be something that we can look at in the way we set up our team. And that's something obviously that we'll look at tonight here as well later in the webinar. So to force a turnover, you need effective tackling and effective tacklers. So Kerry and Galway, two of the teams that contested last year's All-Ireland final, certainly tidied up their art of tackling over the past 18 months. A couple of weeks ago in school, we ran a fundraiser in school. Members of Daily Sport be well aware of it. We had a couple of coaches in. We had Mark Dorn from who's the Clare senior football coach. And on the first night, we actually had John Dibley, who was the coach of that Galway team last year. And a bit of a Q&A with John after. One of the things that John talked about was, and how they pride themselves on their work rate, on their tackle count, on their matchups, huge emphasis. Now everyone will look at the Shane Walsh scores and, the really, really good, exciting football that Kerry played at times as well. But ultimately Kerry, one of the first appointments that Jack O'Connor made was Paddy Talley. It was probably no coincidence that Paddy came in, and you could obviously see then, a huge definition in a huge clarity in the way Kerry tackled and how they defended as well. An interesting one as well, just on the tackling. Effective tacklers, coaches, they're not just your defenders anymore. You actually need to be able to tackle effectively from 13, 14, and 15 high up the field. They now set the tone. I suppose you go back a full 20 years when Tyrone won the All-Ireland in 2003. I remember reading Mickey Hart's book, and one of the things Mickey talked about was 13, 14, and 15, they own their own work rate. Inside that 45, they were responsible for setting the tone. And it was an interesting one because probably ahead of his time in that respect, that, he knew that forwards who tackled hard, he had a chance. And I remember a number of years ago, one of our annual coach education days in school, James McCartan was a guest speaker. And I remember James saying about, it was something along the lines of if he had six forwards who were willing to tackle really, really hard, he wouldn't be that far away from being successful. You know, and it is very true because they do set the tone. They're the first line of your defense, and a huge amount of it comes down to industry and the ability of the players to repetitively being able to track back, make those tackles, and also obviously getting themselves higher up the field and creating that width and that depth in their attack as well, which we'll look at later in the webinar. But physical conditioning is obviously a huge factor in how teams play now. So where do a lot of teams, sorry, apologies. So where do a lot of teams can strategically start their pressing from? So just in the chat box there, coaches, if you just want to fire in, where would you prefer your team to tackle the opposition? Is there any particular area of the field that you would like your team to tackle the opposition? Just fire into the chat box there any thoughts you have. High up the field, close to the sideline, super. Some great answers. High press, opposition kickouts, very good, Brian. Yep, particularly after free kicks, absolutely. You're in control of the press in that respect. So just to expand on that, coaches. So where you decide to tackle the opposition is very strategic, right? So there's not just a huge focus on the training field now on the individual tackling technique. Obviously, there will be a place for the individual technique, but there's now, coaches, going to be a huge emphasis on how teams implement a tackling plan as a collective unit. So how are teams implementing that collective plan? Collective plan as a collective, as a tackling plan as a collective. So this is where communication is important. Communication is a massive part of the tackling. It's about sensing the double up in different areas of the field, the opportunity to maybe get in around a swarm tackle. There might be trigger moments that we're going to look at as well. These trigger moments need to be identified quickly. Maybe it's a loose pass, maybe it's a sloppy ball, a bounce ball, a mistimed solo, a fumble, an undercooked pass. Anything that allows you and your team to go after the ball and the opponent. And an effective trigger press, coaches, it doesn't just require good communication and technique, but it requires a serious amount of energy. And those teams, coaches, who probably tackle the most, work the hardest, probably have the tendency to be there in and around the business end of the season. And that's a massive part of the game now, coaches. Not just that individual technique, but more so the collective tackling plan that you put in place for your team. So here's a couple of scenarios. So this is setting traps for opposition defenders. Okay, it's now become probably a huge part of the modern game. It's very difficult, coaches, from a conditioning point of view, an energy point of view, to go after the opposition's kickouts high and hard on every single one. So there will be times when you get opportunities maybe to just, press, but set a trap. And that trap might be something simplistic as the diagram that's on the screen right now. So what do you see right now? You see number 3 and number 4. Everyone else is really tightly marked. Okay, so what is the goalkeeper likely to do? The goalkeeper is likely to clip that kick out short to his left-hand side. Okay, and he's happy. That man is free. 13 and 14 are slightly disengaged, but they know exactly what's happening. As soon as that ball leaves the goalkeeper's foot, 13 and 14, trigger press. They're going after it hard. What I would like there to happen is 15 comes across and nearly polices the goalkeeper. 10 squeezes in, 11 squeezes in, 12 squeezes in, and really condenses the space. Because don't forget, the defender cannot go back to the goalkeeper. So therefore, you're putting them under pressure straight away. And this is something, coaches, that if you're aware of your opposition, you know certain defenders that you may want to be on the ball. And I remember years ago, I think it was actually probably the last time Manchester United won a trophy, actually. I think it was around about 2016, and Mourinho was the manager, and he was a huge believer in examining the opposition's weakness. They played Ajax, I think it was Ajax in a Europa League final, and they beat Ajax. I'm nearly sure it was Ajax. I can't remember the exact team. I think possibly was, but he had identified one of the centre halves from that team who was very, very poor on the ball, and from opposition kickouts, he literally went man to man, which was unusual in soccer, but left this particular centre half free. And the amount of ball he got on, the amount of ball he gave away, it was highlighted after the game. It was described as a tactical masterclass in being able to do that. But it's something very simplistic. And you'll know your opposition. You'll know the teams you play. There's certain teams you might want to give certain players the ball. And that is setting traps. Using that player, make them uncomfortable, use the sideline as an extra defender. And as someone talked about earlier on there, using that channel to channel that player into a specific area of the field where you want them trapped. And that's just one example, coaches. That can be performed either on a free kick or even in open play. So second little scenario is inviting the opposition out unopposed to the 45, and then triggering a hugely aggressive middle third press. So by really, really being aggressive in the middle third and conceding the kick, but setting up the press, coaches, so it's quite compact. You're quite narrow in the middle third, okay? Because you do not want the opposition getting down the middle of you. Okay, if they get down the middle into the setup zone, into that transition zone, you're going to be in trouble. So what you want to do is try and make compact, and you want to try and channel the opposition towards the sidelines. So once you funnel them down the sidelines, all of a sudden their kicking options are narrowed. Their hand passing options are particularly narrowed because they're heading towards the sideline. So, for example, if that ball was played to 7 and 7 was to travel down the sideline, nearly funnel him towards the sideline, his options are a hand pass to 12, who's going to be swarmed. His options are a kick pass down the line, which is going to be of the advantage to the defender because the forward is going to be winning the ball going away from goal towards the sideline. Okay. Or he will come back out and recycle the ball back out to number 4 or number 3, who may not particularly hurt you, okay, or cause any damage. And that ball then is going to be transferred to the other side of the field. So it's going to become a slow play. So it is a very, very effective way. It's also a really good way of having an opportunity to turn the ball higher up the field, closer to the opposition's goal. Okay. And also, on top of that, it's also, in my opinion, a very, very interesting way of pressing, but actually getting a recovery and getting a breather. So rather than sprinting up the field to try and press the kick out, aimlessly press the kick out, and then a really good goalkeeper ping a ball into space and just take out 6 of you, all of a sudden you're getting your little bit of recovery. Goalkeepers clip the ball out, and the opposition have a tendency then to come out really slow. Okay, it's a slower build up. And then as soon as they hit the 45, that middle 6 are like caged animals, real aggressive press, really going after, really, really going after. So I think someone talked about this. Someone talked about the aggressive press on an opposition free kick or in a free kick. So All-Ireland semi-final last year, I was watching the Derry goalkeeper Lynch. He was getting a lot of short kickouts away to the tip of the D, and it was something that they'd practiced on in the warm-up. You can see it very clearly. But Galway came out in the second half and had a really, really aggressive 5-man press around that D. Really, really cutting off the supply for a short kick out and forcing Derry to go long, and turned a lot of Derry kickouts over as well in that respect. Now, surrounding the D with an ultra aggressive man-to-man sort of zonal press, not allowing an easy and out ball, and you're forcing the opposition to go long. Okay, well, you hopefully win the kick out, and then obviously you have an overload of bodies in the offensive area to hopefully work a score. So you're nearly pressing up a line. Everyone's moving up a line in the team. Okay, is there a risk surrounding this strategy? Is there a risk? Of course there is. But with any risk, there's a reward. So if you risk, you reward. So it's like taking off a defender and throwing on an extra forward. It may work in your advantage, or it may not work in your advantage. It's a risk, but there's also massive, massive rewards at the end of it. And this is another form of how you can really, really go after a goalkeeper maybe who doesn't have a big trajectory on his kick out, Okay, a goalkeeper that maybe struggles when put under pressure. And again, you can taper and tailor these different scenarios around, your opposition, who your opposition is. Like if you're playing against Niall Morgan or Rory Began and you're going after them with a really, really aggressive press. I know Rory Began gave away a couple of short kickouts last weekend, but normally a Began or a Sean Patton or a Niall Morgan will just go straight over the top of you, to number 11 there in the red, who could flick it on, and all of a sudden you have a goal scoring opportunity. Morgan did it in the All-Ireland semi-final in 2001, where they walked one into the net against Kerry, over the top kick out, flicked on by Colin Kilpatrick, and McCurry ran away and they stuck it in the net. And that's something obviously that is a massive risk. So if you are playing against a goalkeeper of that capacity, you may not just commit as many bodies forward in that press. Okay, you may only commit the 3 high and maybe drop 2 out the back or something along those lines. But you will dictate, depending on your opposition, what way you set up. But it is something that's creeping more and more into the game now. Longford are doing it now as well. I've seen them in the O'Byrne Cup against Louth. They went with a very, very aggressive 3 banks of 4-4-4 press. Dublin started this a number of years ago with their 44 call, but this is becoming more and more prominent now because teams are seeing opportunities to really go after an opposition's kick out, and particularly coaches, particularly from dead balls, I think it was Brian that mentioned it there in the chat, going after it from dead balls. So, total Gaelic football. What is total Gaelic football? Well, I suppose you look at the pitch now in Gaelic football. The best teams, they want defenders who can defend, but are also as savvy and as equally good going forward. And the exact same, from a forward perspective, they want forwards who are really, really comfortable tackling as they are scoring. The days of being lazy and lying in the corner and hitting a few frees is probably over. There's a lot more expected now of the modern player as such. And the way the game is evolving tactically as well, it's taking a lot of energy and a lot of high energy players to play the game. So you have your defensive area, obviously, where you want to concede as little free kicks and as little scores as possible. You have your transition area, which obviously is you run it or kick it. Do we run the ball or do we kick the ball? And then you have your attacking area, obviously, where you want to try and manipulate as much space as you possibly can for your scoring forwards. Mark Dorn spoke a couple of weeks ago at our coaching day about the separation. So trying to separate your best scoring forwards from a defender through basketball type movements like screening. A lot of teams are doing that now. There's a lot of separation that teams are trying to create now. I've seen a lot of teams at every level doing it, where they send a man in to screen the opposition's man marker, and your scoring forward peels away and gets that 10 or 15 yards of space, which gives them an opportunity then to launch a scoring attack. I suppose total football, it's pretty simple. The best teams now want defenders who can defend, and as the clip says there, and equally the same as the forwards. But attacking and defending, coaches, attacking and defending as a unit is the clear common goal of every team. That's the common goal, to defend and attack as a unit, and to do this consistently for 60 minutes plus at club level or 70 minutes plus at inter-county level. With the injury time we see in games now, it's now become an 80-minute game, whether we like it or not. It nearly is an 80-minute game. The injury time could very, very easily be solved if you just even changed it simply to a 40-minute each way half or something along those lines, and cut the injury time out, because it's so debatable. But it is taking a huge level, coaches, of physical effort and physical condition. And that's why the top teams are so well conditioned. It is, in fact, coaches, probably what separates the big guns from the rest at the present moment in time. If you looked at the championship last year, coaches, I'm going to call you out a couple of games here. Dublin versus Wexford, very, very close at half time. Dublin blew them away in the second half. Kerry and Cork, very, very close at half time. Kerry won by double figures. Tyrone and Fermanagh, point in it at half time. Tyrone won by 10. Monaghan and Down last year as well, Division 1, Division 3. Very tight at half time. Monaghan came out in the second half and won by whatever it was, 9 or 10. And those teams are what I would call, coaches, Division 1 condition. Division 1 fit against teams who are playing in lower leagues and maybe have relatively tight opening half, and then they're the second half they're comfortably beaten. And yes, people may argue better players, etc., but conditioning levels are certainly 2 to 3 levels above, and that's why total football in the modern game is a massive part of conditioning and how well your team is conditioned, and that can be achieved through obviously having a really good S&C coach, putting in a good off season in the gym and continuing that level of conditioning in the gym, lifestyle change from a player, of course, but it can also be achieved through the way you condition a team in training and through your condition games. So transition play. Well, for me, transition play is certainly key. For me, transition play, your transition from defense to attack, from attack to defense, it's a mindset switch, coaches. I've said this before, and it constantly needs work done in training. That ability, coaches, that ability to be able to switch between defense and attack to defense with so much speed. It takes speed of thought, speed of play. It takes speed of decision making. And you can only make those decisions more consistently and more efficiently when you're actually in good physical and mental condition. So if you're physically conditioned, it comes back to the physical conditioning again. If you're physically conditioned, you can make those decisions. You can make those plays. You can make that right choice. And that is something coaches for you to think about with your teams. How physically fit can we get with the ball, and how can we make decisions under pressure? So more or less every second counts. Every second counts. So when it comes to transition, after turnover, it's been statistically proven the top teams will transition at pace and probably score within 15 seconds. You will get punished. You get that ball turned over in the middle third, you get that ball turned over high up the field. Within that first 10, 15 seconds, you will be punished. And this is where mobility is critical. Mobility is everything, particularly in the modern game. If you've got players in particular areas who've got mobility, so you nearly have a transitioning block of players. You're nearly looking for a block of transition players who have that ability, to make the pitch as big as possible when you win the ball, and to make the pitch as small as possible when you lose the ball. And having that mobility, coaches, is critical, so that you can more or less, coaches, so you can ask questions to the opposition all over the field. When you lose the ball, obviously making the pitch as small as possible, getting numbers goal side, being hard to beat, defending as a unit. When you win the ball, the complete opposite. And that's something obviously that we're going to look at now, that when we win the ball, what are we looking for when we win the ball? Well, we're looking for height, we're looking for depth, we're looking for width or an attack. So a lot of teams are quick at getting back behind the ball, etc. But one thing that I've noticed, and particularly actually in the All-Ireland club finals, one of the most identifiable things I've seen in the semi-final. I went to the semi-final actually when Glen played Mike Cullen, and both teams were quite similarly set up. Mike Cullen were very good, very, very good club side, some brilliant footballers. Glen the exact same, but I just felt Glen just had that little bit more of an offensive game plan. Ryan Dugan, one of the half backs, all found themselves very, very high and very deep in their attack. And what did that allow? Well, that allowed opportunities then for a bit of pace and power and penetration through the middle, maybe an Ethan Doherty or a Conor Glass or whatever, and again, it comes back to that level of physical conditioning. We can have all the tactical innovations in the world, but if your team is well conditioned and in really, really good physical condition, you have a huge opportunity to be successful because you can implement all these different types of strategies. One of the things about adding height and depth and width to your attack, it's okay doing that, and we can all do that. But what we've got to probably do is we've got to probably add those moments of asking questions to the opposition. So rather than just lying in there as a 5, there's got to be lateral movement. There's got to be somebody maybe creating separation for your 14. There's got to be a really aggressive run coming off the sideline. Maybe 10 heading towards the black spot as a decoy runner. You've got to have all these different types of scenarios running through, and the only way to do that, coaches, obviously is by putting your players through condition games and small-sided games and games that are going to replicate the way you're going to play and how you're going to change your offensive patterns and your offensive play. Obviously teams are starting to kick the ball a lot more, which is fantastic to see. There's a lot more kicking coming back into the game, and that's going to naturally evolve as well. You know, I listened to Shane Walsh, the Meath forward, talking last week about how he felt when he made the run now that player in possession of the ball was going to look for him. Whereas a lot of the times players in possession of the ball now don't look for them, you know. And I think because the game is becoming so fast, teams are so well conditioned, the game is so pacey, you know, it is making for a better spectacle. And I think this year we will see coaches a lot more better offensive play, because teams are coming with more of an offensive plan, and teams are understanding how to create space now, and how to open up teams who sit with a deep line defensive block. So I suppose in summary, coaches, looking back over the last 35 minutes or so, one of the things I'd probably say is, like, you think of, in my opinion now, and I just look at the Great Dublin 6 in a row team, you know, maybe created one of the biggest illusions ever in the game by convincing everyone that they didn't have a defensive plan. You know, they were easily one of the best defensive teams in the country. But what separated them from the rest of the pack was, and I keep coming back to this, was their unique ability to transition, you know, with pace, with flair, with athleticism, with numbers. You know, they had that sort of basketball type 4 out, 1 in, great rotation in their forward line, great flexibility, great variation, brilliant footballers. You know, that helps as well. Brilliant footballers. And I suppose last year, Kerry sort of took on the mantle, you know, that they have, with the employment of Paddy Talley, they added that steeliness to their defence, give them that platform to build from, you know, because obviously unquestionably Kerry have the offensive power in abundance. You know, and I think over the last couple of years, Galway as well are another team who have sort of figured it out. You know, they're getting closer to being the finished article. I know they've lost Liam Silk and Kieran Malloy and stuff and a few others this year, but, you know, but over the last 2 seasons, they've definitely, you know, evolved, and certainly under John Dibley's coaching, they've become a hell of a lot better defensively. And obviously maybe, you know, the secret of success, coaches, maybe is probably like all things in life. This is the secret of success in any sport or coaching is probably a little balance. It's probably about getting the balance right from that really rigid defensive platform, and then obviously, you know, mixing it with some offensive threats as well, whether that be from pressing an opposition kick out, or whether it be from how you set up your attack with height and depth and width, or whatever way you set your team up and you feel comfortable setting your own team up. Because at the end of the day, and this is probably the last thing I'll say to you before we have a bit of Q&A, but at the end of the day, it is what suits your team best. It's what suits your team best. It's not what Joe Blogs down the road suits or whatever. You know the players you have, you know the strengths you have. So it's about trying to utilize them in the best manner.
Well, thank you very much, Stevie, and thanks for that presentation. We'll just hand it over to the coaches now for any questions. So any questions that you have for Stevie, just put them in the chat box there, and Stevie will try to answer them. There's a question there, Stevie. What do you see as the next big innovation in GAA?
Oh, listen here. Look, Joe, there's a huge amount of areas, obviously, that teams are always coming out with. Obviously, we've seen, you know, Ethan Rafferty, you know, coming out, and it's been very, very well documented now, the impact of that +1 as a goalkeeper, you know, and doing it in the effective manner. You know, we've seen now teams are starting to really, you know, teams are starting to really press, you know, an opposition high and hard. They're starting to get a lot of height in their attack. One thing, Rory, that I spoke about today to a colleague of mine in school actually is maybe possibility, Rory, of losing defenders who can defend, and maybe incorporating defenders now, particularly even really good ball playing players, you know, when you're even in your full back line, for example, you know, because if a team's going to press a kick out, really aggressively, if you're going to give the kick out short, you're going to take a chance of going short, you want really good effective ball players on the ball, players who can actually hurt an opposition, because an opposition have a tendency then to maybe drop a +1 or whatever it happens to be. So maybe something like that, Rory, I don't know, you know, but there's so many different innovations and ways in which people will come up with new ideas and how they're going to, create just something new, something different. We go back and it tends to, for me, Rory, it's like any sport, like it tends to become very secular. Every sport is very secular. Like even the Ulster Championship is very secular. Like you look now, even at the teams, Down are having a bit of a resurgence. Armagh are on the up. Derry are on the up. Tyrone are probably stagnating a wee bit. Donegal are maybe stagnating a wee bit. There's Monaghan are maybe, coming towards the end of a long, long road. It's secular. Everything you do and every sport is secular. And that's why when there's a big palaver and a big panic over a team that maybe sets up in a certain way, there's always going to be something different. If everybody set up in the same way, it would be a very boring spectacle. So for me, Rory, there will be something coming, I'm sure. Kerry at the Twin Towers in 08 and two big men in the edge of the square and the long direct ball and maybe something like playing a really tight aka John Morrison sort of style nut up front and players breaking into the space and looking for those offensive marks on a regular basis. Who knows? There's so many different ways in which teams are going to be innovative and are going to try and come outside of their comfort zone and think of something really, really different to throw at the opposition.
Stevie, what are the top 3 effective triggers in the attacking zone?
Effective triggers is that for pressing? I don't see a name behind the question. So can that man or that coach probably just put in, is that actually for pressing or is that for scoring or what is the?
I think it must be when the defense is coming out with the ball. If
so what are the 3? For scoring. Yeah. So let me see, just 2 seconds here. Let's go back up. What are the top 3 most effective triggers for scoring in the attacking zone? Well, I suppose when the opposition turns the ball over, they're very vulnerable. So when opposition turns the ball over, now something I got from rugby a number of years ago with Bernard Jackman, was over with Bernard, a coach education opportunity. He talked about when a rugby team turned the ball over, they had 2 calls. I don't know that person's name there, so I can't address them by their name. Apologies, but it's a great question. But one of the things he said was that they had this call called zoom, zoom, cruise, cruise. So if they turned the opposition over and there was an opportunity to punch holes and attack straight away, it was zoom, 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 away they went, really hard, really aggressive. A bit like in football terms, if you turn an opposition over and you have a trigger where, for example, they have many bodies ahead of the ball, and say, for example, you have an opportunity to kick early, maybe there is a wee trigger, maybe there's a trigger call for that. Or if the opposition are back and set, maybe it is something along the lines of, right, relax, cruise, rest on the ball type thing. Armagh had the call last year. You could hear it very clearly, in a lot of matches, like Donaghy was shouting smooth. It's a big basketball call. That means, calm, rest on the ball, don't get carried away, because Armagh have a lot of dynamics players who like to go forward at pace and like to attack. But certainly, the 3 triggers that you decide for your team will depend on the players you have. So, for example, if you've got a small, pacey forward line, you're maybe looking an early direct ball into them. You're looking at a different type of ball in them. If you've got stronger physical players, you're maybe looking at a different type of ball in. Okay, so it'll all depend probably on the forward you have.
Stevie, question from Liam. Is there much innovation in set plays?
Absolutely, Liam. John Dibley ran a session in the school a couple of weeks ago on creating scoring opportunities from set plays, and he did a lot of stuff unopposed, which was interesting, Liam, because it actually gave me a lot of thinking actually about it, because a lot of times, Liam, when we're running kickouts or we're running sideline balls or we're running set plays, free kicks, we're actually doing them, Liam, marked up, with a man-to-man, and a lot of the times it's particularly in your own training, the opposition know what they're doing, so to actually run through a lot of stuff unopposed and nail the unopposed stuff is very interesting. I remember speaking to a prominent soccer coach as well about this, who coaches at a very, very high level soccer. And I was just asking him, picking his brains one evening. And I said to him, is there, in set piece in soccer, obviously there's a huge emphasis on set pieces in soccer, corners, free kicks, etc., etc. And I said, do you do a lot of unopposed stuff? All our set pieces, he said, are unopposed. All our set pieces. So it's interesting, Liam. It is interesting, when you think of obviously our own game, where we feel it just has to be ultra intense every single session, everything we do. So a lot of times, Liam, even walking through stuff, showing things on a tactics board. You know, there's so many different ways in which we can go through our set pieces. And obviously, again, Liam, without without being condescending, like, it depends obviously on the type of player you have and who you have and what level you're working with as well. Because sometimes simple is special, and that's something that I would be preaching all the time. Sometimes simple is special.
And John McGuinness has a question, Stevie. Do you find other sports concepts work well with your players that they can instantly relate to?
Just going to read that there. Sorry, or Joe, can you read that? Where is Joe? Oh, it's in the sorry, Joe. Yeah. Do you find other sports concepts work well with your players? Well, no. Listen, there's plenty of sports concepts, like, you know, there's plenty of other sports as well that can work with players. Like, for example, you know, when obviously don't want to give too much away now because I'm currently working with a team, like, but a couple of teams, but like we have, for example, even in Carlo there, going back 4 or 5 years ago, like we would have had 12 calls, you know, that we would have taken from various you know, aspects of our game, or we would have used from different sports and things like that as well. And obviously, look, you know, for me, sharing is learning, and there's always something that you can learn. You know, I've been very, very fortunate, John, over the last number of years to travel across the Hearts to watch Hearts training. I was up watching Irish hockey, you know, Irish rugby, you know, been a lot of different sports, and you're always learning from other sports, and you're always picking things up that you can bring back to your own group, you know. And obviously, small experience this year, obviously working with a little bit of hurling as well, and it's fascinating, you know, the amount of crossover in the two sports and things that you can use, and obviously things that you can bring from hurling back into the football as well, you know, particularly the skill acquisition element. Ultimately, if we can get our skill levels better in football as well, we're going to have a better spectacle as well. So most certainly, John, most certainly.
Okay. Any other questions from the coaches? No, I'm not seeing any coming up, Stevie.
Brilliant, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much for answering those questions at the end. And Stevie, thanks very much for your presentation. I'd also like to thank all the coaches for tuning in, and the third installment of the New Year's webinar. The next webinar is from Michael Gerard Doherty, and he's going to be talking about maximizing enjoyment and learning in children's GAA practice. And that's going to be Monday, the 13th of February at 8 p.m.
Joe, just to say that, Joe, Michael Gerard, thanks very much, Liam, by the way, just seen your message there. Michael Gerard is absolutely fantastic. Just to message the coaches there. Got to know Michael a few years ago, and he's a brilliant coach, great innovation, and particularly in that level, because that is a unique level of coaching, Joe, that particular age group.
Yeah.
You know, I've only ever really had a very, very small experience for about a year at primary school level, and it takes a lot of patience, a lot of hard work, a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. But Michael Gerard is fantastic in that area. So any coaches that are here tonight that are looking to encourage their nursery group of their clubs, really switch on to Michael Gerard's presentation. It'll be well worth it, Joe.
Brilliant. And that's on Monday, the 13th of February at 8 o'clock. Okay, lads, thanks very much.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you. Thanks,
Stevie.
coaches. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, coaches.